How do you know you're awake right now? Not just conscious, not just moving through your day, but truly awake, aware, real. Most people never ask that question. They don't have to. But there's a man named Elliot Chase who asked it every single day for 3 years, not because he was curious, because he genuinely could not tell. And by the time he figured out the answer, it was already too late to matter. Elliot Chase was a neurologist, not just any neurologist. He was one of the best in the country, published, awarded, respected. The kind of doctor who understood the human brain better than most people understand their own name, which made what happened to him so much more cruel. One morning in January, Elliot woke up in a hospital bed. White ceiling, pale blue curtain, the smell of antiseptic and recycled air. He didn't remember how he got there. A nurse came in, young, calm, with a name tag that read Carol, and she smiled at him the way people smile at someone they feel sorry for. "Good morning, Dr. Chase," she said. "You gave us quite a scare." Elliot tried to sit up. His arms were heavy, not restrained, just heavy, like they belonged to someone else. He asked what happened to him. Carol adjusted his IV and said very gently, "You had an episode. You've been here for 6 days." Elliot looked around the room. Private, clean. A window with frosted glass that let light in but showed nothing outside. A chair in the corner with a folded blanket on it, like someone had been sitting there, waiting. On the bedside table, a glass of water, a paperback novel with the spine cracked, and a photograph. He reached for the photograph. It showed him, younger, smiling, standing with a woman and a little girl in front of a house he didn't recognize. He had no idea who they were. He asked Carol. She looked at the photo. Then she looked at him, and something passed across her face, just for a moment. That wasn't quite sympathy. It was closer to pity. "That's your wife," she said, "and your daughter." Elliot stared at the photograph for a long time. He had no wife. He had no daughter. He lived alone. He had always lived alone. Hadn't he? Over the next few days, the doctors told Elliot he was suffering from dissociative amnesia, a condition where the brain, under extreme stress, simply erases things, protects itself by forgetting. They said it was brought on by a car accident. They showed him the police report. They showed him x-rays of a fractured rib, a bruised shoulder. They were very thorough. Too thorough. That was the first thing that bothered him. Every question he asked was answered before he finished asking it. Every concern he raised had a document ready to address it. The staff was kind, attentive, almost anticipating him, like they'd rehearsed. His wife visited. Her name was Dana. She was warm, soft-spoken, and she held his hand and talked about their house and their daughter Lily and a vacation they'd taken to Colorado 2 summers ago. Elliot listened. He nodded. He tried to feel something familiar. He felt nothing. But here's what troubled him most. And remember, this is a man who spent his career studying the brain, who understood memory and perception at a cellular level. The details were too consistent. When people fabricate stories, there are gaps, hesitations, moments where the version they're telling doesn't quite line up with the version they told before. Memory is imperfect. Even honest memory contradicts itself. But Dana never contradicted herself. The nurses never contradicted each other. Every single story lined up perfectly. Elliot began keeping notes. A small pad of paper he hid under his mattress. He wrote down everything anyone said to him, dates, names, details, and every night he checked for inconsistencies. There were none, which meant one of two things. Either his memory was so completely gone that a life he'd actually lived felt entirely foreign to him, or every single person in that hospital was lying. On the 9th day, something happened that broke the pattern. A janitor, an older man, heavy-set, who came in every evening to mop the floor, looked up at Elliot while he worked and said very quietly, almost under his breath, "You shouldn't be writing things down." Elliot froze. The janitor didn't look up again. He finished mopping and left. That night, Elliot checked under his mattress. The notepad was gone. Elliot stopped sleeping. Not because he couldn't, because he was afraid to. Because every time he closed his eyes and opened them again, he needed a moment to figure out where he was, what was real, whether the room had changed while he was under. He started testing people, small things. He'd mention a detail, a fake detail, and wait to see if anyone repeated it back to him later as if it were true. He told Carol that he and Dana had honeymooned in Italy. 3 hours later, Dana visited and mentioned, unprompted, a restaurant in Rome she said they loved. Elliot's hands went cold. He'd made that up. He'd never said it to Dana. He'd only said it to Carol. They were communicating, coordinating, feeding each other information to keep his constructed reality airtight. But why? That was the question that kept him up those long, pale nights. Not what was happening. He was becoming more certain of that by the hour. But why? What was the purpose? What did they want from him? He was a neurologist. He had no money worth stealing, no political power, no secrets worth keeping. Unless it wasn't about what he had. Unless it was about what he knew. 3 months before his supposed accident, Elliot had been consulting on a research study, a classified study, funded through a private medical foundation, focused on a specific question. Can the human brain be made to accept a false identity as real? Not through drugs alone, not through hypnosis, but through a comprehensive, sustained, controlled environment, a place where every stimulus, every human interaction, every piece of evidence a person encountered confirmed a reality that had been designed for them. The study was theoretical, academic. At least that's what Elliot believed when he signed on as a consultant. He sat in his hospital bed at 2 a.m. and he thought about the frosted window that never showed the outside world, the staff who answered questions before he finished asking them, the wife who never contradicted herself, the photo of a family he didn't recognize, and he thought about the study, and very slowly, like cold water rising around his ankles, he understood. He wasn't a doctor who had been brought to a hospital. He was a subject. He had been the study all along. Elliot did not panic. That was the most remarkable thing about what happened next. He was a man who had just realized that every person around him was an actor. Every memory he'd been given was fabricated, and the life he was being told he'd lived, the wife, the daughter, the house, was a constructed illusion. And he sat very still and breathed very slowly, because he understood something important. They were watching him. They were always watching him. The moment he reacted, the moment fear or anger crossed his face, the experiment would shift. They would adapt. So he gave them nothing. The next morning, when Carol came in to check his vitals, Elliot smiled at her. He asked about Dana. He said he'd been thinking about Colorado, about that vacation, and he could almost picture it now. Carol smiled back. She said that was wonderful progress. That afternoon, a doctor came in, a man Elliot had never seen before, introduced as Dr. Harmon, and said they were considering discharging him within the week, that his memory was returning beautifully, that he was going to be just fine. Elliot thanked him warmly. Then he asked, very casually, as if it had just occurred to him, Whatever happened to that study I was consulting on, the identity research? Did they ever publish findings? Dr. Harmon went very still, just for a moment, half a second, maybe less. Then he smiled and said he wasn't familiar with the study, and Elliot nodded. And he looked down at his hands, and he said very quietly, "Yes, you are." The room was silent for a long time. Then Dr. Harmon closed his folder, straightened his coat, and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned and looked at Elliot with an expression that wasn't quite professional anymore. "The study ends when the subject stops believing," he said. "You lasted longer than anyone else." He left. The door clicked shut. Elliot waited. And then, nothing changed. The room looked the same. Carol came back at the usual time. Dinner arrived on schedule. Dana called that evening and talked about Lily's soccer game. Because here is the thing about a mind that has been rewired carefully enough, patiently enough, completely enough. Even when you know the truth, you can't always find your way back to it. Elliot picked up the photograph from the bedside table. The woman, the little girl, the house he didn't recognize. He looked at it for a long time, and somewhere deep in the part of his brain he'd spent his whole career studying, the part that holds identity, continuity, the sense of self. Something answered. Something that felt like a memory. Something that felt like home. The scariest prison isn't made of walls. It's made of certainty, of the things you believe are true without questioning them. The face in the mirror, the name you answer to, the memories that feel so real, you'd stake your life on them. Elliot Chase was one of the smartest people in any room he ever walked into. It didn't save him. So I'll ask you one more time. How do you know you're awake right now?